Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, it is my honor to join you today and to meet experts and specialists in the field of emergency management from around the world. The summit provides a crucial platform for collaboration, and I am looking forward to learning about innovative approaches to managing crises and emergencies to build more resilient societies. Never has the need for strengthened collaboration been more urgent. A warming planet fueled by runaway carbon emissions is leading to more frequent and extreme disasters. Floods, torrential rains, alongside drought and heat waves are wreaking havoc on communities across the globe. We are experiencing an alarming climate disaster nexus. You are all familiar with the scenarios playing out before us. Water scarcity already affects 40% of the world's population, including in this region. For every 1 degree centigrade temperature rise, 500 million additional people will face a 20% loss in renewable water resources. Global food insecurity, already at dangerously high levels, is also affected. By 2050, climate change will increase cereal prices by 29%. According to the World Bank, climate change threatens to push an additional 130 million people into poverty over the next 10 years. But let me speak a moment about how climate change affects disasters. The influences on climate are changing the patterns of weather, creating more frequent flooding and drought. In the past 10 years, up to 90% of all disasters triggered by natural hazards were caused by events related to extreme weather. We are witnessing once-in-a-decade events becoming more frequent, while previously predictable rainfall patterns are either delayed or more intense. Pakistan's floods highlight this damaging phenomena. Between June and October 2020, more than 10% of the country flooded. The summer monsoon rainfall was some 3 times higher than the 30-year average. Increased surface temperatures led to extreme heat waves, which caused Pakistan's glaciers to melt earlier and in a larger volume. Deforestation had removed the plant life that stabilizes soil, meaning that the ground was less able to absorb the water. This combination of factors led to the deaths of 1,700 people. Another 12,000 were injured, and more than 2 million were left homeless. The damages and economic losses caused by the floods totaled more than $30 billion. Extreme flooding could become a dangerous new normal. Compared to the period between 1960 and 2010, the average number of floods over the last decade have increased by more than 75%. But our concern extends beyond floods. The prevalence of wildfires have doubled, and the average number of drought each year since 2010 has increased by 57%. Meanwhile, more and more urban heat waves threaten the lives of millions. Unfortunately, our global efforts to build resilience in the face of extreme weather and climate change are not keeping pace with growing disaster risks. Climate-related disasters have almost doubled in the last 20 years. Yet, for every $100 spent on total development aid, still less than 50% were allocated for disaster risk reduction. And the countries that need the most support are often those that receive the least. That is because many of the world's most climate-vulnerable countries also suffer from protracted humanitarian crises, linked to conflict, displacement, and state fragility. The largest ever humanitarian relief appeal, $51.5 billion, was launched this past December to meet humanitarian needs in 69 countries. Climate change is already making the crises in many of these 69 countries even more severe, with serious consequences for poor and vulnerable people, and especially women, girls, and displaced people. We can and must do better to assist those on the front lines of the climate crisis, especially in highly fragile contexts. But against this backdrop, I retain a firm belief that investing in disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation can save lives, reduce humanitarian needs, and build a more resilient future for generations to come. UNDRR is the United Nations focal point for disaster risk reduction, and we have a big ambition to help decision makers across the globe better understand and change their attitude to risk. The Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction was agreed by member states to guide countries to scale up measures to reduce existing disaster risks, but also to prevent the creation of new risks. The decisions that are designed to fast-track economic growth can sometimes also increase disaster risks. An example would be building new housing in flood zones or constructing hotels along areas that are facing coastal erosion. We must prioritize climate-sensitive, risk-informed development, not development at any cost. UNDRR's role is to support countries to implement, monitor, and share examples of what works best to reduce the impact of disasters on communities and economies. I would like to briefly share a few initiatives that we feel are most critical for building a resilient future. First, we must urgently accelerate the rollout of inclusive and accessible multi-hazard early warning systems. Quite simply, early warning and early action saves lives. When disasters strike, fatality rates in countries without early warning systems are 8 times higher than in countries that have put early warning in place. But as of 2022, only half of the countries globally and only 1/3 of small island developing states have a multi-hazard early warning system. 6 out of 10 Africans are not protected by early warning. This is unacceptable. The UN Secretary General has called for every person on Earth to be protected by early warning systems by 2027. To this end, UNDRR, along with the World Meteorological Organization, the Red Cross Movement, and the International Telegraphic Union, have joined hands with many partners to support countries to fast-track the development of early warning systems. An estimated investment of US $3.1 billion over the next 5 years is required. This may sound like a lot, but it is less than 50% per person per year, and only a small fraction, roughly 6%, of the requested $50 billion a year in adaptation financing. The success of this initiative hinges on the support of developed countries and donors. Therefore, we urge everyone to contribute to the Secretary General's call to action to save lives. A second focus area relates to getting disaster risk management down to the local level. The frameworks that make up the post-2015 agenda, including the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, were developed at the global level, adopted at the national level, but will ultimately succeed or fail based on how they are implemented at the local level. Local disaster events may not be large enough to garner international or even national attention, but they do chip away at the well-being of communities and inhibit socioeconomic development. That's where Making Cities Resilient 2030 comes into play. Making Cities Resilient 2030 is a unique cross-stakeholder initiative for improving local resilience through advocacy, establishing mutually reinforcing city-to-city learning networks, injecting technical expertise. More than 1,500 cities have joined MCR to date, and the number is growing. The future is local, and we invite your cities to join MCR 2030. A third area relates to UNDRR support to countries to strengthen their understanding of disaster and climate risk. Accurate and up-to-date information on climate change projections, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and demographic trends can help decision makers identify the most significant risks and develop appropriate prevention policies and responses. Although there are still many data gaps, we are seeing tremendous advances in this area, and the future is exciting. Innovation is key. For example, we know that artificial intelligence may help predict future disasters by analyzing large amounts of data, including historical weather patterns, seismic activity, and oceanic currents to predict hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, and tsunamis more accurately. AI can analyze data from various sources such as satellite imagery, social media, and news reports, and this information can help authorities plan and allocate resources for disaster response and relief efforts. By analyzing data from previous disasters, AI algorithms can identify patterns and trends that inform response strategies. As we become more efficient in predicting and responding to disasters, we must not forget that our goal must be to prevent the risks that lead to disasters. This is why high-level political engagement and advocacy remain so important. The G20 has established a disaster risk reduction working group, and CEMA is a member of this, by the way, supported by UNDRR, which will convene in Mumbai, India later this month for its second meeting. This important work stream will cover a range of critical topics, including financing, inclusive multi-hazard early warning, and infrastructure resilience. This year also marks the midterm review of the Sendai Framework. A high-level meeting of the General Assembly will take place next week in New York to provide a platform for member states, the United Nations system partners, and other stakeholders to reflect on the findings and recommendations of the midterm review. We will identify course corrections and new initiatives, but above all, we will reiterate the need to accelerate action. The forthcoming COP28 in Dubai is another key opportunity to scale up actions. Investing in disaster risk reduction is investing in averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. UNDRR sees this COP as a critical opportunity to reiterate the importance of risk reduction as part of the global climate agenda. But for scaled-up action, we need to strengthen climate and disaster risk governance. Effective governance involves the cooperation of different sectors and stakeholders, not only government agencies, but also community groups, private businesses, and civil society organizations. Building the adequate multi-sector, multi-stakeholder governance, coordination, and financing mechanism to guard against disasters is not easy and requires strong and committed leadership. The good news is that there is no shortage of men and women who are willing to rise to the occasion to protect their communities when confronted by the risk of disasters. And this includes all of you who are here today. Disasters know no boundaries, and their impacts cascade across sectors and supply lines. They entrench poverty and inequality along the way. On our current trajectory, by 2030, the world will face some 1.5 significant disasters per day. Nonetheless, I do believe that we can build a safer and more resilient world if we move quickly to strengthen collaboration, commitment, and above all, political will. I would like to thank NCEMA for organizing this important summit, and I'm looking forward to the successful discussions that will follow. Thank you very much.